Hey guys, Pete here. So I'm picking up with my Mr. Robot Season 1 rewatch today. Today we're going to look at one of my not so favorite episodes, to be honest, but it's still an important one. So we're going to look at Season 1, Episode 2. It was called Ones and Zeros. And I think that, well, I'll tell you, when I first started watching Mr. Robot, I watched it after the season originally aired. So I watched it in a binge. Season 1, that is, and I was really compelled by the pilot. I thought it was great. I liked everything about it for the most part. And then this episode, when I watched it, I was a little bit put off, and I think I ended up putting a little bit of time in between watching the next one, and then I quickly fell right back into it. So I just wanted to point that out. I think compared to a lot of TV shows, it's fine, but I think this is one of the episodes that it develops characters, but because we are early in meeting everything and trying to figure out what's going on, I don't think that I felt hooked into like what was going on enough. And I'll just go through what happened and I'll talk at the end a little bit about what put me off a little and then, how that sort of worked itself out as the season continued. So it starts out right where we left off. We see Elliot in the big conference room at the E-Corp building. We saw him get picked up and taken there by mysterious guys in an SUV. We found out Tyrell Wellick was there. And then we find out that it's not as ominous and crazy as it looked. He's just trying to hire him. And, Rami Malek does a great job, as he always does, of being, acting as though he's completely out of his element there. He tells Wellick that he wants to have some time to think about it. Tyrell tries to put the pressure on him, and eventually Elliot says, no, I'm good where I'm at. So for the second time in the series, we see him walk away with some money. In the first episode, Ron offered him a bribe. He said he wasn't into it for the money. And here, Tyrell told him that he would make him a multi-millionaire within a couple of years, and you pretty much can believe that that would have happened. Elliot decides to leave instead. And then Mr. Sutherland, the driver of the SUV, who we don't exactly know what he does except for he works for Tyrell, he drops him back off at his place. As Elliot's coming in, he sees Shayla outside with her drug dealer boss, who we'll get to meet a little bit later. And we find out when he goes inside that Elliot's definitely ramping up his drug use. Like I talked about it in the last recap, he talks about how he has this great plan to control the uncontrollable. And you kind of know that it's going to get out of hand, and it does. He then hacks Tyrell, and because it's easy and because everything looks really normal, he gets paranoid right away, and he wipes all of his drives, he destroys them, and he throws them away outside in a trash can. And we see him grab a picture of his mom at the beach, like him and his mom standing on the beach when he was a kid. So why is he using more drugs? Well, it seems like it's partly paranoia and partly just because drugs are addictive, so he's getting the excuses that he needs to dive deeper into it. We see a couple times in this episode that he's starting to question what's happened in relation to his working with Fsociety. But it's more of a, he's not sure, he wants to do something, he wants to change the world, but he's not really sure about these people that he's very much in bed with now. And like I said, it's Rami Malek is what saves this all the way around. I mean, his performance, he does this really well. He becomes a tortured person who can't really figure out which way's up, but he knows he's going to fall if he doesn't do something. Beyond that, not too much else happens. As far as the main story, we do get some stuff. We get Gideon congratulating him for saving the company and gives him a raise. And then we see the Fsociety video that was released, and this was one of those things that I just really was sort of like, ugh. I mean, I get it that they want to make this, I don't know, I guess they want to make it seem relevant to the way that things happen in real life. It just seems really kind of comic-y to me, and they make some really crazy demands that nobody's obviously going to find agreeable. It's basically they're making an empty threat. It's like they offer this deal that no one would make. So it's kind of just like making noise. Do you know what I mean? Another thing that happens here is that when Elliot comes back to his house at one point, Darlene, who we haven't really met officially yet, is inside his shower taking a shower. And they talk a little bit, and we don't really know. Elliot's freaked out by her being there, and she ends up taking him back to Coney Island. There, Mr. Robot explains that he has a really big idea of how he's going to destroy the off-site data storage facility that Evil Corp has. It's called Iron Mountain, and he's going to blow up a gas pipeline, and that's going to blow up that building, and a lot of people are going to die, and Elliot's not into it. Mr. Robot kind of makes a decent argument for his approach, but Elliot's definitely not going to do that. And so he basically walks away. There is a good speech there from Christian Slater as Mr. Robot about being a 1 or being a 0. It's pretty good, I would say. But his push on Elliot, it doesn't work. So Elliot leaves, and he's basically disconnected from Fsociety at this point. So I guess if you had to put it all together, what happens there is Shayla gets into a bad situation with her boss, Fernando. And he's a slimy guy. He drugs her, basically, and he sleeps with her. She wakes up in the bathtub not knowing how she got there. After they have, Elliot and Fernando have a talk, which is pretty creepy as well. And whenever, he wants to take her to the hospital, she's like, hey, I make good money. So I guess this is what kind of pushes him back over the edge. He realizes that not only does he have to take this guy out, but he's got to do something bigger because, the world's just really screwed up. So he ends up going back. At first, Mr. Robot won't take him, but then he says if he explains to him what happened with his father, that he'll give him another chance. So Elliot explains the story, and this is really important going forward. He tells them when that he was a kid, he was like 8 years old, that his dad was one of the best computer engineers at Evil Corp, but they fired him shortly after he was diagnosed with cancer. He told Elliot about it, but he told him not to tell his mother, and eventually Elliot ended up telling her. And this created a rift between Elliot and his dad that lasted until he actually died. It was never resolved. And he actually pushed him out of a window by accident. Like he shoved him, and Elliot fell out of a second-story window and ended up breaking his arm. So it's a tough story. Like, it's a real tragedy. And it's, whenever you're a kid, you can only imagine, like, thinking that you broke your father's trust, and then he refuses to talk to you until the day he dies and goes off dying without it ever being resolved. In a weird twist, though, Mr. Robot says, you know what? Did you ever think it was your fault? You broke his trust. It's really kind of odd at the time when you watch it. Elliot basically says, no, I was 8 years old. What are you talking about? I was trying to help him. And, Mr. Robot then pushes him off the boardwalk ground onto the beach below. So it's kind of strange, but it does kind of build the Elliot and Mr. Robot dynamic. And I think overall that's the good part of it, is it gets to where those two characters came from. We see that Mr. Robot's pretty unflinching when he sets his mind on something, that he's just going to do it. And that Elliot has some unresolved turmoil under the surface, and he's not nearly as black and white, you know what I mean? He's a much grayer character, whereas Mr. Robot kind of comes off as evil after he pushes him off the boardwalk there. So it's only the second episode, and overall the aesthetic is there, the look is still there, everything's still good there. But, there's a couple of things, like I said, where the Fsociety, even to the mask of the Fsociety, I mean, it's obviously very closely related to Anonymous. And to me, it seems like it's a little bit, especially when I first watched this, I was just a little bit like, man, that's kind of cheesy. But as the show carried on, I started to not really mind that so much, because we find out Sam Esmail does this in more ways. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. It's not my favorite part of Mr. Robot, but it does the job. You know what I mean? Like, we need them to have a identity because of what happens later. And yeah, so that works, you know what I mean? So I would have done it a little bit different, perhaps, but hey, I don't have any TV show to do it in, so it's whatever. We did also meet a side story here that was Ollie and Angela are outside the record store. We meet this hacker guy, We don't know who he is. He's just giving away CDs. And then we realize later, whenever he's trying to put it into his computer, that it's got some kind of malicious software on it. As we see the guy who we know is Cisco later, he is watching as Angela, he's watching through the webcam. He's watching Angela get in the shower. And then he's talking to someone on IRC or whatever. And that is actually the Dark Army, which is a more serious Chinese hacker group that we heard Mr. Robot mention when he was talking about blowing up that data backup. So that's the main thing that I would say here is this is not quite the best episode, but it is there are important things here. The Shayla stuff is important because it's a motivation for Elliot. Definitely the Mr. Robot and Elliot tension is important, and we're starting to see more of what Fsociety has in mind. And we got a little bit of an introduction to the other members of Fsociety, Darlene and Trenton, Mobley, and Romero, which we'll get to know them all better before, it's important. The Tyrell stuff's a little bit strange. We don't know a lot about him yet. I remember when I first watched the season, now I know who he is and why he's important and all that stuff. But when I watched it the first time, I was like, is this guy important or what is he? He's kind of just a weirdo. But hang in there, you'll learn more about him as well. He is, in fact, taking Terry Colby's place for the time being. He did tell Elliot that at the beginning. So he's in an important position at Evil Corp at the moment. Let me know what you think in the comments of this episode. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. I'll be doing episode 3 soon. I'm going to definitely get through all of these before before season 3 starts. I do have another season 3 preview video that I was working on this morning, so that'll be coming out probably before the episode 3 does. But, just join along. It's good to watch these episodes again. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and we can interact over there. Check out my Patreon, please. I would love to have you guys join in over there. If you join, you get to help me decide on what to do in the future videos and get a direct line of contact to me that is much better than anywhere else. So I think, I ask questions to my watchers and everything else, and it'll be a good way to, keep things going. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.